Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. I'm joined today by Katherine Evans of Bold as Brass, and she is on a really valuable, important, critical mission that I'd love for you to support and get involved in as well, all around equity when it comes to safety in particular, because that's kind of where her background's come from, but also in this bigger picture as well. What does PPE have to do with gender equity? You're going to discover that in this episode. What can you do to support Katherine in this endeavour? You're going to hear about that as well. And we're going to talk a bit about the bigger picture, why this is important, what we should be doing about it, where in an organisation we need to be focusing our time and effort, and how Katherine can help. This one will get you thinking, hopefully it will get you reflecting, and fingers crossed, it'll get you acting as well. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Welcome, Katherine. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Looking forward to this one. Lots to unpack and get into, but I thought it would be helpful to get a bit of context first. So perhaps you could just give us kind of an overview of yourself and your history and your background, and kind of, I suppose, what's led you to this point of being in this position of having these kind of insights, opinions, passions, etc., which we'll then unpack a bit.
I left uni in 2008, which was not a good time to be leaving uni. Yeah, it was really, really bad, and nobody wanted to take me on anywhere as a graduate. So I ended up working offshore for £16,000 a year, which was just pitiful. And it was okay because I felt like I was earning money. I lived with my parents. I was 21, 22, so it really wasn't that bad. And you do. One of my friends did offshore. A couple of people I know actually, but one of my really good friends did offshore, and I think it was you sort of have long periods offshore where at least you're not having to spend any money, I suppose. So then the money you've got is not actually for your full life, is it? It's only for the periods of time when you're at home. So I suppose there is that to counterbalance it slightly. Yeah, my rotation was 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, because I was working in the sector. So it wasn't that bad. It just wasn't for me. I couldn't see myself doing that forever. I could see how upset the women were who worked offshore there was a team of women who were like do all of the cooking and the laundry, and they just looked so down, missing their families. And I thought, don't really want to get to that point in my career where I have to decide, do I want to change? Do I want a family? I want to be able to do something that's actually going to work with like a work-life balance like that. Things have changed now, that there are people who help women in FIFO jobs. So that was 15 years ago. So yeah, the world's changed. But yeah, I went to the Netherlands, and I worked in the Netherlands for a year. And then I came home and I was working in a coal mine underground, and that's where I felt like I really found exactly where I wanted to be. I found my tribe in the team that worked there. They were all really, really lovely. And I noticed that there were differences. And I noticed when I worked offshore as well, there were differences. There were times I didn't feel safe. PPE was always an issue because I was so small compared to the really big people who work offshore. It's just where I was, because it was the Dutch sector. There was a lot of Vikings, and I was definitely not a Viking. I was a very short Celt. So yeah, perfect for working in a coal mine. I never lost my hard hat. It was always on my head. Yes. Yeah, there were just differences started creeping in. I went to work in Canada and I was on $20,000 less than the men in the group because I was a foreign female. And they were open about that and said, yeah, you need to prove yourself because you are foreign and a woman. And we need to know your worth, even though I'd worked for that company already for 2 years, and which was longer than the men in the team who had worked for them. But it just wasn't equal. And I always thought this had been left behind long, long ago. I hadn't been prepared for this when I was in university, for what the working world actually is like for women. Because it definitely wasn't 50-50. I think there was 8 women to 30 men on the course I was on.
At university?
Yeah, in university and doing geology, straight geology, but never felt really that outnumbered, probably because we were so vocal.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about subjects, isn't it? Because I did French at university, and I was outnumbered significantly. So, something like, I'm trying to think now, obviously different, for me, there were different elements and different modules and things. But I remember, certainly in one of them, there were kind of two men and about 15 to 16 women or men and girls, depending on how you look at it, boys and girls, depending on how you look at it, depending on how you think about people's ages and so on. But yeah, I could see how in other subjects, I'm sure my friend who I mentioned who worked offshore, he did physics, and I think he was in a similar situation to you, where it was skewing very much to men. So it's interesting how some of these differences can appear in different areas, I suppose.
Yeah. I did geology A-level in school as well, and there were 2 girls and 8 boys in that class. So it started all the way back from there, but geography was far more split. Strange. But there you go, that's how it starts, and then it kind of gets more and more diluted then as you go on, as women leave the workforce, and they are, because of there's not the changes being made that are needed to keep the diverse representation in the workforce. It's very, very slow to adapt, and I think it is difficult to speak out a lot of the time because you're closed down so quickly. People don't understand your experiences, they can't comprehend your truth. They think you're making a fuss over nothing because they don't have that feeling. Yeah, they're always having to look over your shoulder, and it's just different for women. And I guess that's something that not even an ally can quite understand, because that level, that base level of that feeling just isn't there.
Yeah, you can try and put yourself in somebody's shoes, but you can never actually be in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
Fair to say. And then you've gone on to a different role and a different business, or I think it was a different business, but then which you recently ended after a few years, and you've kind of taken the exciting step of going out on your own. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I just decided I wanted to follow my passion, which had been building over the last year and a half in setting up Boulders Brass when I came back from my second maternity leave. Boulders Brass was initially just a support group to bring women together, so women didn't feel like islands in their places of work. And it was just for mining companies who were mostly based in the southwest, because I didn't realise quite how many mining companies are actually up in the northeast. That started off small, and then very quickly you realise how many people just like you're actually connected with through LinkedIn, because I did it through LinkedIn, and how many people you've met in your career, because 14 years isn't actually that short a career. That's a fair amount of time to have made a lot of connections, and then those connections invited their connections, and before you know it, we've got over 1,000 members. 850 of them are women in the women's support group, and we support each other. I arrange career coaching for them through a really wonderful team of volunteer coaches who will give an hour of their time. And we run campaigns because we found that there are certain things that are affecting all of us and our career progression. And we use the network as a way of finding new job opportunities, posting new job opportunities, networking. It's a difficult thing to do, but you could reach out to so many people in that group and start building relationships in fields that perhaps you want to work in. If you just want to ask for a bit of help or you want some support, then suddenly you see that there are, oh, I know somebody who you could talk to, and you get introduced to people. And it's that side of like the network, but also that community aspect of we look after each other in this tribe. If you need a hug, you let us know, because we're there for you just like you're there for us. And I think it must have been something that was really needed in the way that it's grown so quickly. And really, really lovely when you go to award ceremonies or networking events and people come up to you and say, I know you, and I don't know them. Oh no, this is awful, because I used to know everybody's name in the group, and it's so big now, it's difficult to remember everyone, but then you see them talking and I remember who they were talking, who they were spoken recently.
That's a problem I've had as well, where, because doing this and the other things that I do, and you know, having a relatively high profile, people know you and you don't necessarily know them as well. And so if I go to like an event, somebody will say, "Oh, hi, Christian," you know, and then they introduce themselves, and I normally remember them based on their name, but I don't necessarily recognize them straight away. So I feel your pain there.
I'm gonna have to learn some sort of introduction speech that will be non-offensive and make them feel like I don't know who they are, because I appreciate all of those women who've joined that group and the allies group as well. So but that was my passion. And that's something that I've been pushing in my spare time, whatever time I had, and I realized that this is exactly what I want to do. It's people and planet. The side of mining of that, well, that is like the community aspect, the community inside the company as well as the community outside the company. The social value, the value side being like more of feeling valued, I think, than the money side. That's the bit that's coming through to me in the word social value. And gender equity, employee experience, all of these things that you aren't trained for technically, but feel like I've picked them all up in learning how to network and communicate with people, and learning what makes people tick, what gets the best out of people, and how to bring those together to create a feeling of camaraderie.
So that's a very big agenda that you're grappling with there. So any support that any of the audience can give, I'm sure would be gratefully received. Let's drill down a little bit into the kind of health and safety aspect of this, because obviously that's the kind of predominant audience for the podcast, is going to be safety and risk management professionals. So talk to me a little bit about the issue around PPE, and then once we've sort of delved into that a bit, we'll perhaps go a bit wider again.
So the PPE issue, and like I said in the beginning, when I started, PPE was always a problem because it was always too big for me, and I didn't really know why, and I just accepted it, and I accepted it for a very long time, that that's the way that PPE was. But then I think it was coming back to the UK after working in Canada, and Women's Fit was available.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's novel. Obviously, I'm going to get some Women's Fit trousers, because these trousers I'm wearing are terrible. And I found that they just didn't fit at all. They fit worse than the men's, and I'd order the men's. That was just down to the way that a gap had been seen and just filled very quickly with products that hadn't been designed properly. But in filling that market, it felt like job done. I just noticed more and more that I wasn't the only one that was feeling like this. Women all over the place were feeling like this, and they were really struggling because they're like mine. Sleeves were too long, legs were too long. They couldn't get clothes that they could fit chest in while still being fitting everywhere else. So gaping patches of things like the vests are awful, and you really can get vests that fit. They don't have to be so enormous to reach the regulations. And the safety side of it, we're putting people at risk because we're putting people at additional risk. Not everybody has to face that risk. Just because we're dressing for the average size man and we're buying for the average size man and we're covering up the market that there is for women because we continue to buy men's clothes, which means that PPE isn't being developed, or perhaps that PPE has been developed and they don't see the point of putting any more money into that development because there's nobody buying it and they're all businesses. But it's the business owners and the procurement departments who aren't purchasing the right equipment from the distributors. Distributors aren't getting the right equipment from the manufacturers, and the manufacturers are making stuff, but not. Perhaps they could do better in certain circumstances, because I know there's some fabulous PPE out there that I've been able to try that fits wonderfully. It's just the cheaper stuff hasn't been designed as well. The money hasn't gone into it. It's not a sustainable product. That is the stuff that's still being bought. Yeah,
it's a classic vicious circle, isn't it? That we need to break. And there's obviously a safety risk associated with that you've identified, but there are also lots of other outcomes of not providing this right PPE, aren't there? Talk a little bit about that. What else is it? What are the problems is this causing, or what other issues is this a symptom of? Wider, bigger issues that we need to be more aware of.
Well, if you think of how much your feet affect your day, there's something that you know a lot about. When you put men's fitting boots onto a woman, men's feet are a lot wider. The toes spread in a different way to the way women's toes spread. The weight distribution is different on the bottom of the foot. So when you put a woman into a man's shoe, it's that much wider than it should be. And the toes have to clench all the time to stop the foot from slipping around inside the boot. And if you don't, you end up with rubs. And those rubs then become blisters. And all the time you're just thinking, my feet hurt. Perhaps you've got a pair of boots that you can't even tie around your ankle because women's ankles are that much smaller than men's ankles. And if you've got a metatarsal in there as well, then they are incredibly hard to pull tight. You can only get them to a certain tightness. Your foot could actually lift out. So all the time you're thinking, don't roll your ankle. Oh my gosh, my feet hurt. Are my laces coming undone all the time? Because that's a problem for everybody, isn't it, with boots that don't fit. And your brain just isn't on what's around you. It's not on the task that you're doing. And when you combine that with PPE garments that also don't fit, you're constantly having to roll up sleeves. Your trousers are too tight because you've been wearing men's fit PPE or women's design trousers that just don't go around your hips enough, that you actually can't, you don't have a full range of motion. You can't do manual handling jobs. You can't get in and out of a site 4x4. You start to sit back and think, I just can't be bothered because this is just so difficult. I've worn trousers before and gloves and stuff that will they just make the joints tired. They'll make the muscles tired because of that extra force that you're fighting on it all the time. And that's why I wear the PPE to the gym, to find out exactly how it works in a very sweaty circumstance, because the southeast gets incredibly hot, and that sliding and stopping your movement over an hour is hideous. You were so tired coming home. But that thing of you start to sit back, you start to notice the people who fit their PPE, they're progressing. You look lazy, you look like you're not really enjoying your job, you're not participating, your name isn't coming up in positive circles anymore. You're not the one being sponsored.
You're being set up to fail.
Yeah, you don't feel like you belong there when you turn up to site looking like Mr. Tickle. People don't respect you when you're wearing clothes that look like you borrowed them off your Uncle John.
Yeah.
It's different. And I think people think I'm clutching at straws when I start saying that PPE has got a lot to do with progression of people who are wearing the wrong kit. But there's got to be more in it than just women just shouldn't be here.
Yeah, cool. I mean, it's a bit like there's the poem, isn't there, For Want of a Nail. Have you heard of that?
No.
So it's basically it's for want of a nail, a war was lost, or a kingdom was lost, or something like that. It was like it starts with it starts talking about a nail in a horseshoe, and it amplified because there was no this nail wasn't right, the horseshoe didn't fit or something, and then because the horseshoe didn't fit, this happened, and then because of that, this happened, and it's kind of amplifying this thing up. Where at the end of the day, all for the want of a nail, and it's kind of this horrendous thing happens. I can't remember exactly what it is now. It's about a kingdom being lost or something like that, and it's all but it brings it right back down to the nail.
Yeah.
And it just makes the point that actually what might seem like small or insignificant things, the effect of those, if you follow them through to their natural conclusion, massively amplifies and can cause real damage. So you should check that out and maybe do a version.
Yeah, that is exactly it. Just something so small and how that can escalate. And Lindsay Duthie wrote something fantastic on Instagram about how her PPE was affecting her progression. And the biggest thing I think of that was that she said that every time she had to climb a ladder, she'd have to hold the crotch of her coveralls, pull them up, and have to climb up the ladder one-handed, and risk slipping if everything is wet in men's boots. And then this anxiety building day after day after day, or hour after hour in that day, and then go home absolutely exhausted mentally and physically, and then put it all back on and do it the next day.
Yeah. And just that feeling of embarrassment as well, that there must be having to do that through no fault of your own. That's the worst thing, isn't it? It's not something that you're able to control because you're kind of stuck in this position, but through other people's decisions, which is tough. And I suppose that is a great illustration of the reason why what you're doing and what you're campaigning for is really needed, because I think people will to get change to happen, we need to rally behind a cause, and we need to get a lot of people doing that. And making that change on your own seems daunting, whereas if you've got 1,000 odd people with you to start with and it's building up from there, then obviously that's when things can start to happen.
Yeah, it is getting somewhere.
Yeah,
definitely getting somewhere. And we've got a lot of backing of industry media bodies now as well, who all want to do what they can, because these are the people who educate.
And on the PPE point, you are doing some good work now around you're working with some of the suppliers, you're kind of putting together some kind of badge or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, the certification. We want to be able to offer that to a number of manufacturers each year to promote their wonderful products. And it's that bit about finding the wonderful products that will do they won't fit everybody because everybody is unique, but for people who are this shape, this is fantastic. For people who've got size whatever hands, this is a wonderful glove for you. And I think it's that side of it. We want to be able to try and test the material and say that this is good, and put it out there and draw more attention to these really, really good manufacturers, because there's still such a disconnect between the manufacturers and the end users. So many end users still think that there isn't any PPE, but it's not. It's all of the other broken rungs that are stopping it. Like the chains are broken, the links, are broken in the chain to get it to them.
Yeah. And is this problem one that is across the board? As in, if we think about let's say, a cleaning or facilities management company who are going to have a large proportion of their staff be women, probably a larger proportion in that sector than perhaps you experienced in some of the jobs that you've had before, and therefore you'd hope that they would be a bit more attuned to this stuff. Is that the case, or is it still a problem even in organisations where the proportions are more equitable? Or do you not know?
No, I'm not sure. If I think of the NHS, though, there's a clear example that PPE wasn't fit.
Okay, yeah. I'm just thinking of people that I know who are, senior in these sorts of organisations, who we should be trying to get this message to.
Yeah, definitely, and they, I'm sure, would see straight away how positive it is to be dressing their people in the PPE that fits them. If it's gendered PPE they need, then get the gendered PPE, but they may not realise that all PPE isn't equal. I think people just think of PPE as this is PPE, and don't see it as like, you wouldn't send a woman to Burton to buy a prom dress when you know that is a man's shop.
Yeah. And it's a tangential point, but it's kind of making the same broad point. In my world, people look at PPE and they think, oh, safety shoe, that's fine, that's all I need. But actually, there's a difference between a slip-resistant shoe and a safety shoe. And just because it's a safety shoe with steel toe caps and ankle protection doesn't necessarily mean it's slip-resistant. So I do think there are lots of misconceptions around the topic of PPE.
Yeah, definitely. Not all orange is equal. Just because a coverall is orange doesn't mean that it complies with EN ISO 20471. It might just be FR, it might be ARC, it might have 4 reflective bands on it. But if your company policy or the regulations stipulate that you need to have class 2, then that is of EN ISO 20471, and your FR garments don't comply with that. And if somebody gets hurt in that situation, what happens then?
Exactly. I think that's an exposure that people will have but not know they've got, and that also is troubling. So yeah, hopefully this conversation will be making people kind of go away and think about this in a bit more detail. And I suppose on that point, what steps should somebody in the audience who's a head of safety or a safety manager or whatever, what should they be going away and doing on this specific PPE point? Some practical steps they can take to try and understand where they're currently at, and then what they can do to improve.
Review what they have. I think they've put their procurement department to buying the PPE, and they, I guess, are more involved in the big issues on site. But this is something that is such a big issue because you are putting people inside a piece of safety equipment. And that piece of safety equipment may be the difference between a broken ankle and not a broken ankle. And it's not to do with hierarchy of control, because this is on them all the time. This should be the first thing that's sorted out, not the last thing that's sorted out. So I think review, and I know that people don't have time to do this. I know how stretched people are with all the leaning out of businesses, and that's why I've gone into my side of it to say that I have got all of this knowledge that I've built up. I want to put it to good use. So that's something that I can do. Go back and review their risk assessments, see what PPE they've got for these, find out if it's the right one, find out if I can find them something better that fits the individual. Because I know everybody in the industry now for PPE in the UK, and I know where to get certain things that are bigger in the leg, bigger or longer in the fingers, and help individuals that way. But you're just trying to string things together, because you can't just chuck PPE at something and say that's okay, that's done now. It's like it's there for a reason. It's so important.
Yeah. I do think sometimes the hierarchy of control is is wrong in that, as you exactly said, PPE is your first line of defense for a lot of things where you've only got PPE to do the task. The task has to be done. So I do think sometimes people overlook that. So a good review and reach out to you for some advice, I guess, would be a sensible thing to do. And I'll definitely make some more intros to you. Once this goes out, I'll send it out to some specific people and say, look, I think this would be beneficial where they've got, particularly where they've got large workforces where they are putting a lot of people into PPE, because so I'd encourage anybody that's joining us on this conversation to do the same. Think of people that who have those large workforces, and send this episode to them and try and get them on board with looking to improve.
Yeah, and the advice that I'll be giving is impartial, because I'm not trying to flog anything.
Yeah.
So I want you to get the right thing for the individuals to make their life better, and so that they can have the opportunity to reach the levels of their career that everybody else has who's historically had PPE that fits.
Yeah. And the PPE issue is obviously really important, and we're speaking here today mostly to a safety-related audience, so it's going to be resonating with them. But obviously, as you alluded to at the start, PPE is only a fraction really of what you're campaigning for and the change that you feel is needed in the world. And I suppose be interesting to chat a bit more about that. I suppose one observation I've got is that, going back to that thorns for nail point, I think if you can get that message clearly across, I think you've got a really good chance of trying to affect this change, because I don't think you're going to find ideological resistance to it. But it's about, how do you get that message to the right people and explain what the problem is, isn't it? So that they can take steps to address it. Because I imagine most people kind of think, oh, we're doing pretty well on this.
Yeah, I think there are so many companies, they want to change. The levels up at the board kind of level, they are the ones who speak about these differences that they want to make. Here are some ideas, or go and find somebody with some ideas. I'm not an expert on this, and they just roll it out, and then they carry on doing what they're good at. That needs to go down then into the company, and it needs to get through that middle management layer. And it's that middle management layer, I feel, is the bit that always gets a bit murky. And the workforce underneath are the ones that struggle the most. Then they're the ones who really, really take it on the chin, because they'll be the ones who are experiencing these negative experiences, and that affects their every day. They take it home with them. Work-life balance, I don't know if I even believe in that anymore. My work and my life has merged together so much, because it's passion for me. It's the reason, it's my values.
Yeah.
They things that drive me.
Yeah.
So yeah, the equity side of it, I think there's so much more we could be doing. It is going to cost money.
Yeah.
But we've decided how much we're willing to spend on things, like I can take it back to PPE, willing to spend on things based on what it's always cost to fit out an average size man. So the average size of whatever it takes to make a person feel comfortable in the workplace and to progress has been based on somebody who is no longer the representation of the workforce. So it is going to cost more. It might take some money out of these companies' profits, but these companies are floating some pretty hefty figures around April to show how much they've made in a year. And I think, how much of that could you have spent on buying the woman the correct coverall when you claim that they're too expensive?
And I think you're right to identify that middle management layer as the blocker to a lot of this, because I think it's like with any of these big themes, if you surveyed a board, they'd probably all be in alignment with kind of what you're saying, just as they would around safety as being a high priority. I don't like to use safety as our number one priority, but that's the term that's often used, isn't it? But then what you find is that as you go down, things get in the way, things block the progress. Typically budgets and P&Ls being a big one. Oh well, we can only spend X this year, and we need to improve on that, and so actually we'll postpone looking at this, or we'll just carry on with this, or we'll do this deal because it's a little bit cheaper. And it's things like that, the sort of day to day, that sort of gets in the way. So, with what you're seeking to achieve, are you therefore trying to target the board members? You're clearly targeting the workforce, shall we say, with what you're already doing, or are you going to sort of try and go for that middle layer? And how do you sort of see that working?
Yeah, that middle layer is difficult. They are well experienced people, and what they're doing has worked for them very well up until this point. And there could be reasons that I don't understand why they've got those positions, and there may be absolutely nothing you can do to knock them off those benches. So I think the way that I've spoken about it before, and somebody said to me, is like it's a permafrost layer all the way around, that when you create these policies and these strategies at the top and you train at the bottom, you have a two-stage approach there. It's trickling down, but it's also rising up from your workforce, and it's becoming what that workforce is about. They see it as their vision, and because it's positive for them at the end of it. It's helping them, it's making them feel like they belong. And as they move up through the workforce, if you can actually do the right thing and keep them there, then they are the next level of leader. And their knowledge, their experience, and their mindsets will be that central belt one day. But it's difficult. I haven't actually got an answer for that one yet.
No. It's like a lot of these, massive topics, isn't it, that we all kind of know. The environment would be analogous. We all know that it's the right thing to do. We all know that we'll end up getting to the right place more or less eventually, but it's a long game, I suppose. And so it's thinking about what you can do to affect change, at a sort of micro level, whilst working on this macro picture simultaneously. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it's definitely a valuable and a worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah, I think the companies that are global, they're the ones that struggle the most to actually start this, because they want to work as one company. It's all about being united. And they are the ones then that have to think about all the different cultures that they're working with. They might be in countries that don't view women the same way that we do, and they want to be respectful of that culture, but at the same time respectful of the women in other places where it's different. And I think there you really have to manage that on a smaller scale, like you said, bringing it back down, changing one thing, just working in we're lucky that we're on an island, so I guess you can just think of it as a whole. You work in that sphere that you can affect. And it doesn't quite work all around the world because people are so different, cultures are so different, heritage is so different everywhere.
Not an easy problem to solve. But I mean, what could people in the audience do to support, I suppose, is the key question at the end of this. What can they do to help you on this journey? How can they get involved? Who can they introduce you to? What kind of steps can they take themselves to try and affect change? I suppose, what's the rallying cry?
I think don't just leave it to those who are affected. The underrepresented groups and the women in the groups. This isn't something for women to fix. This is definitely, society needs to fix this for everybody, because everybody to police are having this issue where women aren't being treated equally. They aren't given the equity they need to succeed, and ultimately they're getting hurt and killed because their PPE doesn't fit them. I think if you are a man and you are an advocate, speak out, close things down when you see that you don't want things to escalate like the Andrew Tate kind of epidemic. You don't, just close it down. I do not agree. Say something. Be an advocate, not just an ally. It's great that you're an ally, but you also have to speak up. If you can see that there's a way that Boulders Brass can work with you, then that's fantastic. We would love to be able to get our views further out. If there's a way that you think that I can work with you, then contact me and I definitely will reply. And if there's anything else, I think building communities inside the company, if you work in a company, speak to your communities, find out what are the problems, and don't just dismiss those problems and think we need to focus on the silver lining, we need to focus on positivity. Find out what the issues are so you can develop a plan to improve equity for those individuals, because otherwise they'll just leave. Your talent will be gone, your succession plan gone.
Great. And what then would be the best way for people to get in touch? Where can they find your community and all of that kind of pluggy stuff so people know exactly where to go?
Yeah, you can find me, Katherine Evans with a K, on LinkedIn. That's where I do most of my stuff because it's an easy platform. If you want to join Boulders Brass, you can just look for them in the search box, Boulders Brass. There's a women's support group which is closed just to anybody who identifies as a woman. And then there's an Allies in All group, which is for absolutely anybody in any industry, any gender. So that's how you get in touch with those. You can also go through a couple of links and you get them from my page. But yeah, just come and have a look and say hi.
Good stuff. I'll pop that into the show notes as well, so that'll be easy for people to find. And I would just reiterate what Katherine just said, and just stand up, speak out, get involved, try and push this change in whatever level you can, because it's a really important thing for us to try and get right, and it won't be an overnight success, sadly, but we've just got to keep moving in the right direction.
Yes, it is exhausting when you're the only voice, but you're lucky when you have Boulders Brass. Is always somebody to pep you up.
Good stuff. Community is what it's all about. So yeah, definitely believe in that. Well, thank you very much, Katherine. Really enjoyed it. Powerful discussion, big topic, something that we all need to be aware of. So thank you for coming on and explaining it to us really well, and for the work that you're doing, and really wish you all the very best with it.
Thank you very much.
All right, and thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode next week. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.